to start off with a welcome from Associate Professor Jennifer Barrett. Jennifer publishes on museums, culture, art, and the public sphere. Her monograph, Museums and the Public Sphere, was published in 2011, and her co-authored monograph, Australian Artists in the Contemporary Museum, was published in 2014. Jennifer is a chief investigator with Avril Alba on the Australian Research Council linkage project, Australian Holocaust Memory, Human Rights and the Contemporary Museum. She regularly collaborates with the museum, heritage and gallery sectors and has been chair of the board, Museums and Galleries New South Wales since 2015. Between 2000 and 2011, Jennifer was Director of Museum Studies, and between 2010 and 2015, she was the Pro-Dean Academic in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney. She is currently, as Marima mentioned earlier, Director of the University of Sydney's Culture Strategy, driving positive cultural change at the university in line with commitments under the 2016-2020 Strategic Plan. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here, and before I sort of move into a bit more detailed discussion around what we're doing here, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. I would like to acknowledge elders past and present, and also those that are emerging leaders in that community. I'd also like to, in sort of, I think, making this relevant to me, I grew up on Darug land. My family is from Dunghutti land. So I think it's just really important to acknowledge in this process how we travel over the many lands of the Indigenous people of this country while we're here. And I think one of the other things that we often acknowledge here at the University of Sydney is that the site of the university has been a place for meeting and learning for Indigenous communities for a long time, obviously in a different context and a different sort of way than it is now, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and I hope in some way that we continue that tradition in the work that we do over the next few days with this workshop. So in continuing, I guess, to moving to linking that to the mentor conference, I'd like to say it's been our pleasure to partner with the Laureate program and to work with the team in terms of pulling this workshop, I should say, together. It's consistent with what we're trying to do with the university's culture strategy in that it's about reciprocity amongst the academy. It's about us learning from each other and understanding what it means to be an academic, but also what it means to be an academic in the 21st century. It's been a really important issue. Now, if I could just remind you that the workshop, because it's because of all those other conferences in the building. The workshop is designed for women and gender diverse early career researchers and late stage high degree research candidates in the humanities and social sciences, and it is part of Professor Sluga's Laureate program. And I think that the fact that we have things like the ARC acknowledging the need for us to do some of this kind of work, this mentoring, is really, really crucial. And I also, congratulate Glenda on such an initiative. But I also think that one of the things that's really important here is that we're not just talking about what's going on in our university or what it means to be in the academy. I think what we're also talking about is how we manage, how we kind of progress through our careers that are very much connected to the outside world as well. The academy, as we've seen in the media in recent months, probably for several years really, has been not under attack, but it's largely misunderstood in terms of government, in terms of the broader public. And I think that's partly what you're dealing with as you progress through your career in higher education. And I think that's one of the sort of aspects I think that will take us, that we'll need to discuss as we think about your career, but also think about some of the skills that are needed in the 21st century for being an academic. I'd also like to, and I've been asked to talk about this, is to talk about the issue around cultural and linguistic diversity, which is an issue for us here at the University of Sydney. In particular, we have not a very diverse leadership in terms of cultural and linguistic diversity. And so it's one of those issues that we're trying to address because there's a sense, a very strong sense that we need to be engaging with the diversity that we're reflecting. We're trying to reflect the diversity of the community in our leadership team. And I think there's an awkwardness with that, and I think we could talk about that a bit later on, because we're having quite a few discussions around what it might mean to set targets, what it might mean to look at equity debates in practice. So it's one of the points I think I'd like to raise here as a kind of taster of what we might be discussing over the next few days. How do you deal with those kinds of those issues? Because they've even been real in terms of setting up this conference too, where there have been people, some males who wanted to be part of this because they felt like they should be given this opportunity too. So having the capacity to debate that is really important, and the importance of trying to address sort of issues of diversity are also sort of key in terms of the culture strategy. We've certainly found, for instance, in the recent culture survey at the university, that many people, particularly women who are working on developing their careers, face some common challenges. That is, women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Things such as uncertainty to their career strategy, limited or no mentoring from other colleagues, considerable hesitance in putting themselves forward, difficulties in establishing an independent academic identity, limited awareness of the university context and its expectation of academics, poor quality of AP&D discussions, and an absence of sponsorship in terms of people assisting them with their careers. So there's some really interesting issues arising with, as I say, women who are culturally and linguistically diverse, but also what we've got, I think, is some of those issues that I just raised are probably common to many of you as well. So I look forward to taking part in the panel discussion in a moment, but also in some hearing about how this workshop progresses. It's a great model. It's one we'd like to replicate. It's a model that's also been used in the sciences, and it's had great effect. One last sort of reason to be really confident about the impact of such a workshop, and also to I guess let you know how fortunate you are, is that the university's been running a Vice Chancellor sponsorship program for women who are culturally and linguistically diverse. And one of the things that they've been doing a program that goes over a whole year. And I met with a consultant this morning, and one of the things that she pointed out was that some of these women, so these are colleagues here at the university, and I know we've got from all around the country here, what she was saying was that some of these women just need help with writing a CV, looking at interview techniques, thinking about what sort of roles to put themselves up for, understanding the landscape of the university and so on. So these are all the sorts of things you're doing now. So I think, skilling you up now, but also developing your understanding of the context that you're moving into is just such a great opportunity, and one I feel pretty confident saying that many others would have liked to have experienced at an early stage in their career too. So welcome, and make the most of it, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say and to meeting you. In fact, I think we may just do that now. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much.
Great segue. So now we've done introductions of all the participants, I am going to finish introducing the speakers for our plenary panel. I'm going to introduce all of the speakers up top. They're each going to speak for around 15 to 20 minutes, sort of in 1, 2, 3, and then we will open it up to questions for the remaining time. We're going to finish up at 3:30, and there will be snacks at 3:30 if you start feeling peckish around that 3 o'clock mark. So first we're going to be hearing from Professor Barbara Caine. Barbara Caine AM is Professor of History and Head of School of Philosophical and Historical Inquiry here at the University of Sydney. Prior to taking up this position, she was an ARC Professorial Fellow at Monash University. She has published extensively on the history of feminism, including English Feminism, 1780 to 1980, and was the General Editor of Australian Feminism, a companion. She's also written collected biographies of British families, including Bombay to Bloomsbury, the history of the Strachey family. Her most recent publication is Biography and History, the second edition, which was published this year. We will then be hearing from Professor Glenda Sluga, who is a Professor of International History and an Australian Research Council Kathleen Fitzpatrick Laureate Fellow here at the University of Sydney. She has published widely on the cultural history of international relations, internationalism, the history of European nationalism, sovereignty, identity, immigration, and gender history. And as we mentioned in our opening remarks, Glenda is the convener of this inaugural mental workshop. And then we will hear from Associate Professor Jennifer Barrett, who I introduced up top. I'm going to get out of the way and let the speakers take over.
Okay, so let me go back to the simple old days, bad as they were. I remember when I was a student here, and I had a friend who had got a job with a professor of government, and I went to see her, and she said, we were chatting, and she said, and he said to me, he said, you're lucky I'm a breast man and not a leg man. So that's a kind of speech that would not be acceptable in one university, which is not, So, I mean, when I became an academic in my early years, there was a kind of notion that you'd sit around and we would talk about the candidates, and people would say, oh, but I mean, he's a good man. And that meant everything. He's clubbable, we want to go and drink with him, he's smart. There's no equivalent. I mean, we talk about somebody as a good woman. I mean, you might mean any variety of things. So that blatant sexism where if you came in and you were a young woman, then would be the question, when are you going to have a child? That doesn't happen in the same kind of way. But that's not to say that we aren't in institutions and, of course, in a society which is heavily, heavily, heavily male-dominated. Again, in the bad old days. I mean, I remember the first woman professor of history who was appointed, she must have been appointed in the 70s. And, of course, when she went to conferences, she couldn't go for a drink afterwards because women weren't allowed into public bars. And her own professor, the head of her department, thought she might actually like to share an office with the secretary because she'd have all to be for companionship. So that world isn't here. But the worlds that we live in are worlds in which there are all kinds of forms of subtle discrimination, as we all know. And you can measure them. I mean, there's lots of people, Marion Ben, all sorts of people do measure them. You can measure them quite often in terms of the kind of pyramidal structure of universities, how at the level A and B, you're pretty well equal, and then as you go higher up, level C, then level D, then level E, and especially above that, it narrows and narrows and narrows, and the number of women gets smaller and smaller relative to the number of men. And of course, that's most particularly the case in research-intensive universities. It's much more marked in the GO8s than it is anywhere else. But it's all complicated because we have people like us. So I just mean to say you're always in a situation where you say, well, the ARC discriminates against women, and then you have a Glenda who's a laureate, except the laureates go to the ones that are specifically labelled for women and not to the general ones, which tend on the whole to go to men. Or, I'm always in a situation where, or almost always in a situation where I'm in the minority, and so would Jennifer be. And sometimes you're not. So let me just say, for example, I came back to Sydney University from Monash. Now, Monash, when I went there, only had men in the hierarchy. But actually last year, for a short time, the Vice-Chancellor, the Provost, and the Deputy Provost were all women. And suddenly it looks different. But then, of course, 6 months later, that Provost's gone and there's a man back. So what I want to say about the optics in that kind of way is you sometimes have a notion that there are women at the top, and that's great, but it doesn't mean it's going to go on being great next year. We haven't yet got to the point where institutional change has been internalised in such a way as to make a difference. And we are ourselves the illustration and the symptom of it, because we're not the problem. We are just not the problem. We're all fine, thank you very much. And the boys who should be here are all walking offices having a very nice time, patting themselves on the back, and they might have given you a bit of money to run this. So this is both a sign of change. You wouldn't have had one of these in the 70s or the 80s, and so it's very nice that it is possible. And since for the last 20 or 30 years, in different sorts of institutions, workshops and mentoring groups and so on to support and assist women have been being organised. But the ones that ought to be going to working out with men why their culture is so sexist and discriminatory, they don't happen. So that's part of the other thing about being where we are and both the differences and the similarities. So when I said you're in a sexist situation and suck it up, I mean, I think one of the important things now is there are things specifically available for women, so for God's sake, use them. You know, do not, I think that's really, really important. I think people are making different kinds of attempts to assist and support women in different ways. I think we should all use them whenever we possibly can. But I don't think they're necessarily changing some of the sort of fundamental structures or assumptions. Well, they've changed them a bit, but in complicated kinds of ways. And so I think that does mean that thinking about your career and how to manage it in a way as a woman is a different kind of thing. And I mean, there's all marginal groups. I mean, anybody, the sort of gender diversity or minority groups come into us in a similar kind of way. You are different in some way from the norm in terms of how you are, how you look, how you behave. And so there are the kinds of questions that I think one needs to think about in terms of planning a career is how do you manage that for yourself? It doesn't help to feel yourself a victim, it's a waste of time, and you have to pick your battles because you can't be fighting them all the time. So I think amongst the really, really important things that one has to think about is how you find a support network for yourself that will not only empower you, but also make life fun. You know, I have to say, I have sort of girl networks around the place, and partly it's just go have a drink and a laugh. You know, because I'm not going to spend my life banging my head against the brick wall. It's great, you know, it doesn't get me anywhere. And I can do all sorts of things. I mean, there's all sorts of space. But sometimes you need to think strategically about how to use it and how to work it. And that's the thing about both picking your battles and working out when you work with the institution and when you want to resist it. Now, one of the things that seems to me to become interesting and important for women is the question about how do you get yourselves heard? How and when do you speak? And how do you do that effectively? And I must say, I was very struck by that when I realised in my early years at Sydney that I used to be quite careful in meetings about when to speak. Not a lot, because you know I women talk all the time and occupy all the sound space. They do. Or not, whichever. Listen to men as often as we have. But the perception is there, and that's the thing you have to work with. Women are listened to differently. There's all sorts of stuff you go on the website about how women speak differently, what vocal registers, ways to introduce things. But it is the case that in public meetings and in departmental meetings, it's often quite hard for women to actually be heard. And those are things where I think you do have to take on board the strategies of how to think about it. Now, my own way used to be very careful about when I spoke, and often to try and choose a moment when a decision was about to be made, to say, no, hang on a minute, let's do it that way. But there are much more effective ways that younger women in all sorts of other areas of the world are using, which is to ensure that all the women in the room work to support each other. So when Jane says something, and they say, fine, Fred, June says, now I really, really think what Jane said was important. I really think we need to talk about that. So I think those kinds of things, and that's again about the thing about having women's networks in that kind of way, to actually work with other people to make sure that you and your contribution are recognised in that kind of way, in public meetings and in public fora. So it's that kind of getting what you say reinforced. And actually, if I was going to sort of segue from that into something else, it would be to say, I think it's also important when you're thinking about having a career to take on board the question about how you interact with the institution and the place. I think we're now in a situation where it's customary for women to do lots of stuff, and there's all this discourse going about how women do all the shit all the time. And then there's a kind of generation of quite ambitious young women who come in and say, I'm not going to do that. And again, I think that there's a complicated way of thinking about yourself in relationship to an institution, because I think generosity and good citizenship are valuable qualities, and if you have them, I think they are valued. I think the important thing is not to refuse to do the necessary tasks, but to ensure that if you're taking one on, you are recognised formally. You are doing it in the role. You are not doing it because Fred took it on and he just thought he'd get Jane to organise these bits. You go over and replace Fred. So I suppose I've been thinking about that also, because my work in university for the last, whatever it is, 25 years or so, has tended to be around the kind of administrative, head departments or I head schools. And I like it. I'm good at organising things. I enjoy it enormously. So I don't want to get higher up. I don't know the lower echelons above me. I think something happens to people drink the Kool-Aid at that level. But I enjoy the administrative stuff, and I found the learning of that kind of thing quite a valuable thing to do. But the important thing is just not to do it on somebody else's behalf, and to make certain that you get the recognition for it. So I think one of the things I would want to say to people in terms of thinking about yourselves and your careers, I don't know whether you're all planning on academic careers, whether you all manage academic careers, or whether you might think about taking a PhD into some other area, because there are wonderful worlds of work with PhDs. I have a daughter with a PhD. She's not going to touch university. She's doing startups and ACOS and all kinds of other things. But I think that the important thing in that kind of way is to think about what it is that you really, really want. That's the first thing. What do you like? And what are you good at? And I think one of the other problems that women have in general is recognising that they're good at things. My generation was brought up never to say nice things about yourself. If there's anything nice to be said about you, someone else will say it. Which makes it very hard for people when you have to do things like write grant applications or promotion applications or something like that. I'm just the best things to discuss with it, But I think that a kind of a realistic assessment, a kind of audit of yourself, of the skills that you have and that you don't have. I mean, if I take myself, I think I'm a good strategic thinker, I think I'm good at organising things, I think I'm good at getting people to work with me. I'm appalling at managing now. It's just not one of my skills. Whenever I can, I get someone else to go and do that. But I think it matters that you work those things out about yourself and that you think about what it is, that you want and how it is you're going to get it and how much of your time and effort is going to go into the career. I did just think as I was coming that it was worth pointing out that we are all the mothers of children on this panel. And, it's possible to do that if that's what you choose to do. You don't have to choose to do it, but you can. It's possible to work your way up in the world and have kids and enjoy it. And I think it's important to know that. And that different sorts of people have careers, trajectories of different kinds, and they happen at different rates. So I think that along with the question about being, thinking seriously about what you want and about, is the question about also being realistic about what's available at a certain time. You're all just in the PhD stage, but when I'm talking to young women academics who have children, it always seems to be the most important thing is to say, what is it possible for you to do? Do not set yourself a schedule where you know you're going to fail, because then you can just pick yourself up. It's a complete waste of time. If what you're going to be able to do is write one article in the next 2 years, fine. Don't plan a book. So I think that those kinds of things are important too, to kind of just think about yourself in your world and what kinds of things are possible for you in relationship to that. And I also think that, I suppose I'm going to go back onto the question about thinking about how very bad women often are at promoting themselves. I had a very engaging lunch on Monday with 2 staff in my school, both of them were level Ds, both of them have been coming to say to me for the last 3 years, I'd like to apply for the promotion of level D. And I look at them and say, so, where's the application? And what they're expecting me to say is, you have to do this, and this. And I say, all the runs are there, just sit down and do it. And they're terribly busy, and the one thing they won't take the time for is the thing they need for themselves. So what I've done is, they're both quite aggressive women, I put them together and I'm hoping they'll bash each other up into getting applications done in time. But so I think that's one of the other things that people need to think about and be careful about. Occasionally women apply for things too early, but much more often the general thing that is said about women is they wait longer than is necessary to apply for the next step. So again, when you're thinking about what you've done, what your skills are, what your interests are, make sure that you know what you've learned, what you've done, where you've gone in the last 2 or 3 years, where you're up to in terms of where you're going to be able to go next.
Thank you, that's great. And I think, the point I take away from that is that the need for self-consciousness raising never ends. It's not something that you it's not a hurdle you jump at the beginning of your career thinking, what do I do after my PhD, but it stays with you. And I'm presuming inside or outside the institution. So some of those points that Barrett was making are going to be valuable as you continue, because every time I listen to it, I think, I just wanted to say, I guess before I launch in, just to underline your point about how different and more kind of difficult it is really to navigate the entrenched sexism of the present. So in the case of the Australian Research Council, or the ARC, which I presume you've all heard about, given that it's now found all possibilities or not, that with the Laureate, so the Laureate is one of a series of grants that they offer, and you can get project money, you can get fellowships, DECRAs, the early career ones, and we'll be talking about all those this week, and future fellowships, and then there's the Laureate for old people, and it's the only one old people. So, but there isn't one for women. What there is there are usually about 10 or 12, I think, in the country, and then what happens is, because of the ways in which these systems work, and this is true at any level, there are all sorts of inbuilt obstacles to women getting them, partly because of how people read CVs, how they read, women's names attached to them and all the rest of it. And the ARC is very conscious of this and tries to encourage assessors to be aware of their kind of inherent bias and all the rest of it. Anyway, so you end up always with about, say, 10 ARCs, 2 of whom are women, often. Well, sometimes there might be one more, but usually the majority of them are given to men for these reasons. And then what they have are these 2 extra fellowships called Kathleen Fitzpatrick and Georgina Sweet. One is for humanities, one is for science, for a woman in each of those. So then out of those 10, they'll decide to award a humanities one to one of the humanities women, and usually there's only one woman, and one science one. So it's not that you get a women's one, but there are these fellowships. And the fellowships are for mentoring women. So this is partly funded by the money I get to mentor women. And I always say, well, why aren't the men mentoring? I mean, why don't the men have to do this? So men take their fellowships and go away and just work on their projects. And the women have to think of extra things to do, which I don't mind. I love it. It's great to have the opportunity. I've been able to use the money for all sorts of things. But and there is a split in the community about whether that gives me, that privileges me, or whether that gives me extra work that men don't have to do. My own view is that I think it kind of, to your point, that it embeds the idea that this is a woman's problem that women have to deal with, right? So it's always women who are the ones that have to mentor people. And actually the problem is not, the more stories you hear, and we won't go on with intake, so I won't tell you some of them, but the more stories we hear, the more it's clear the problem is the culture, not us. So this is really about learning how to navigate the culture, right? And to some extent, it's about gendered obstacles in the culture. To some extent, it's about just being early career researchers. And there are other kinds of challenges. They're not always about gender, but I think it's worth always being aware of strategies for dealing with what are embedded in intrinsic kinds of gender bias within the institution and within all these different opportunities and possibilities that are now open to women at a much greater level than they used to be. And humanities is always different from sciences, but even within the humanities, that's why we ask about discipline. I think statistics show that there are differences between, say, philosophy and history in terms of where women end up and why they're there or not there, and how they proceed in their careers. So, that explains a bit then also about the Laureate and why you're here. I'm going to appear at a number of these panels between now and the end of Friday, and I've promised Holly and Marima that I'll do, each time I'll have 5 points. I just thought that would be useful. I'll do 5 points. But actually, can I just say also, while we're here, I wanted to thank Holly and Marima for the amazing job they've done, really, in constructing the program, and they've done it while they've been on their own kind of research field trips as well, and fellowships in the US. So thank you very much, and we'll have a chance to thank you probably at the end as well, but just to kind of get us in the mood. So I will start my first point with the question, which I said to myself when I saw the topic, career planning. You can plan a career. This is what I would have said, when I was in your position. The idea that you could plan a career would never have occurred to me. And it's only recently that I've discovered that many of my colleagues around the world have always planned things. The men especially, they have kind of this goal. I want to be at Harvard when I'm at this. How do I get there? It's very interesting. So, and I think it's not a bad way of thinking about your lives, right? What do you want? How do I get there? So these are strategies that's worth thinking about, because often, it's not that you get blown along by the wind, but you do the things that you're interested in, which I think is not a bad thing, and I'll say that later. But so then you have to make a decision whether you follow my footsteps, which is, can you plan a career? And I wonder whether you shouldn't do what I did, despite the fact that I'm very happy where I ended up. But, you know, I had no idea about the institutions that I was part of when I was doing my PhD. I didn't quite understand academic life, even though, you know, the point is, of course, that it's changed quite a lot in the last 2 decades, at least. If not 3, would you say 2 or 3? What's the history of the changes?
Oh no, yes, it was not
In the 70s and 80s. So it started when I was doing my PhD in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's changed more radically, I think, in the last 10 years than before, in terms of the kinds of pathways for early career researchers. So in the old days, the idea was that you got your PhD and you looked for a job. I mean, when I was doing mine, I thought everybody always said to me, well, there are no jobs. And I have always thought, every time I've heard that since, because it's almost generational, but I think every time a PhD thinks about it, they're confronted with that. There are no jobs. And I thought, well, I'll just be a waitress. This is great to do it. It's great to do it. And I don't know, and I always believed that it was great to do regardless. But in fact, in the new environment, the question is, you know, is it worth doing? And that's something that people have to ask themselves about. I do recall that I wasn't encouraged to do it. Even when I finished my 4th year and heard that there was a thing called a master's. In those days, you could get a scholarship to do one. I had one for 2 years. But before I got it, when I was thinking about doing it, I went to see my head of department, who was Greg Denning, a very famous historian. And I said, I want to do this. He said, don't bother. I said, why would I bother? He said, well, I don't think I once confronted him with that after I was professor. Sorry. He said, oh, did I say that? You know, so rather offhand then to not even remember that. So don't listen to what people say, believe what you want to do. And so I did bother. And I got the scholarship. I was regarded as I'm a first generation university student. Non-English speaking background, we were in different kinds of diversity positions. But always thought of someone who must have gone to private school. Anyway, not if you listen to my answer. So maybe don't do what I did. Be informed. My second point would be be informed, and being here is part of that, of course, and you're relying on us to inform you in some ways. And understand the changing nature of the university and academic life. So the question for us was always, you know, will there be a job? And now it seems much more, will there be a postdoc? Will there be a fellowship? Because I think in that space of jobs, there are now many more postdocs, but fewer jobs. So where that leaves you is very problematic. So you must think about and reflect on, you know, if you have the opportunity to take a postdoc, think about where's it going to take you, because it may not take you to a job. It's not a guarantee. And I do know people who've had them, who haven't, and then kind of prolonged the decision about what they want to do. So it's not to say don't do what you want to do, don't have a plan and go for it, but to say that I think the environment is different. Whereas once a postdoc was always like a special thing, an add-on, and the assumption was that you get a job, I don't think that's the case anymore, even if it's an ARC. So one should think about the institution, where postdocs positioned in terms of one's field and discipline, and whether it allows you to do what you want to do in terms of building a CV, particularly if you're interested in research, but maybe you're interested in other things. And so my third point would be, you know, to do what you're interested in and believe in, to know your value. I heard that as a slogan the other day. Could I tell myself that? Know your value. And that's one way of, I don't like lean in. I think we don't lean in. No, I think that's easy. But knowing your value is not a bad, not a bad sort of motto to pursue. And, you know, and as Barbara said, you know, reflecting on what you're good at. And I make this point often to Holly and Maribel, who it seems to me are good at many things, including being leaders in you know, engagement and networking and you know, the kind of not just the research they do, of course, but also being in the community and leading the community and creating opportunities for other people to reflect on what's going on in these institutions. The reason why they're doing this is because they did their own smaller version of it within the faculty that was very successful. So they were the perfect duo to help us set up the mentor workshop and the inspiration for it in many ways. So know your value, and remember, as Barrett said, there are different kinds of academics. So if you do decide you want to be an academic, knowing your value might mean realising that you're good at research and building communities, what they may call building capacity. But in this case, building communities that aren't always about research, but much more about intellectual communities and about political communities in some ways, with shared views on the institution and a shared interest in discussion about institutions, but also, like Jennifer, leading in terms of going into the managerial space, but leading it in ways that allow us to shape the university, think about it as a different kind of institution and a really important public institution in that way that changes society. My fifth point would be to grab at opportunities. Now, this also sometimes takes us into that space of, what is an opportunity? And it means sometimes that women end up doing different kinds, more things. They do their research and they do all that other stuff of mentoring, or someone says, oh, here's an opportunity to run a workshop. Should I write my chapter for my PhD and help Glenda with the workshop? I'll grab that opportunity. And I think it works for you, right? As long as you recognise. As long as you recognise that it's valued by other people that think of university in the same kind of way. There will be people who don't always value it. And I've heard it from men as well, that there is a kind of older role model of the academic kind of cloistered in a room just doing their research. And in the same way that men don't have to mentor and think about the gender issues within the university, often as research leaders, they assume it means I just go away and sit in my room and someone else's problem is going to sort everything out. And you have to make a choice about, if you have strengths that lead you in other directions, you should believe in them, even though they're not always going to be valued. Even on promotion committees, even though that's changing, because people recognise the gendered nature of that kind of labour, division of labour. But I think that's why it's important to also build your networks, as Barbara said, and in that sense, surround yourself by people who think the same way as you do about the institution. Which doesn't mean you only hang out with people that are like you, but it does give you a sense of probably security, but also validates the approach you're taking. And I think that's a really important opportunity, if you like. So mentoring, networking, which we'll talk about over the next 2 days, and understanding and knowing what kind of person, what kind of researcher, academic, post-PhD person.
Well, there you go. Okay, so this is quite difficult. I don't know why I agreed to go third, because most of what they have said I agree with, and it's listed here on my notes too. In terms of the role that I'm in currently, I might start in here and then go backwards, which is what I'm doing. But the role that I'm in at the moment, it's really interesting. Director of Culture Strategy in the Vice Chancellor's Office. So I'm working with the Vice Chancellor. I'm doing exactly what Barbara said we shouldn't do, because the person who is the lead on the strategy really is the Vice Chancellor. And I wonder quite regularly about whether or not any of my male colleagues would have taken up the role of Director of the Culture Strategy instead of the PVC or the DVC of Culture. And that's a question that's not only me that's asking that, but there are many other colleagues too, because we're looking at how other colleagues negotiate their positions. And I think that there's something to be learned there, but there's also something that the institution needs to really take into account. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, along with many other colleagues. This is also part of that strategy, where we're trying to say, well, look, we need to have policy and procedures changed so that we've got better representation on interview committees, in promotion and so on and so forth. But the thing is, that's not enough. You need people with the intention, sort of taking, that they need to take on board the intention of these policies and procedures. So we have many quite progressive things in place, but people don't necessarily observe them and use them. So they can, there's not necessarily a way to pull people up, unless you've got someone on the committee that will say, well, look, you know, this is not really the sentiment, that this is not really the intention of this particular policy or procedure. And it does become problematic because quite often it's the women who are then taking on board some of the institutional issues in those sorts of discussions. And Barbara's absolutely right, we do need to make sure that we're not seeing women being the issue or the problem that needs fixing, but it is institutional, which is the key to some of the work that we're doing. And I think that there are groups that are trying to deal with that. So for instance, the Vice Chancellor Sponsorship Program that I referred to before, which is for culturally and linguistically diverse women here at the University of Sydney, they've said, well, this is great that we've got this opportunity to be together, we're building our network. In fact, one of the most valuable things for these women has been the network, building the network. But they've said, well, why aren't we also being put up for these other opportunities, such as the other sort of leadership programs and so on. So one of the things that their work is doing is what they're doing in conversation and feedback to me, that I then give to the leadership team, is that we need to be, these women need to have opportunities to go to the other types of programs, but also, why are we running leadership programs for them when there's not necessarily leadership opportunities? So what kind of, it's systemic, and I think that brings me to one of my key points, which my colleagues have already mentioned, and that is, sure, be strategic, take up opportunities, but you also need to understand the environment that you're working in, because if you don't, you're just setting yourself up to really give yourself a hard time. Because if you don't understand the landscape, other people will make decisions for you, and also you'll just be, I think, others will be, to making decisions for you, but also you're missing out on opportunities as well. So when I say look at the landscape, understand how the institution you're working with works. Understand who makes decisions. Understand a bit about the money and where that money goes. Understand what's, if it's a department, understand a bit about, not just about the structure of the department, but so what is, who's making decisions there, how are decisions made. And there are opportunities there sometimes to make interventions or to form parts of like networks in that way. But it's really important, I think, you really do need to understand that you're moving into a context that has already in place a culture. And your participation will help change it, or it may help reinforce it if it's positive or whatever. So it's those kinds of things you need to acknowledge that they exist. I think that another thing we need to do in the 21st century, I think it's probably we always need to do it, and I think we need to be able to talk effectively about the work, the research that we're doing to different kinds of communities within the universities, but also outside. So I know the ARC are now looking at impact, which is really important, but also what we're seeing is there's much greater need for us to develop understanding about our research across the institution as well. And again, that's part of building on understanding the landscape, but it's also, we need to be part of the broader community's discussion about the life of, what do academics do? Because at the moment we've got too many people in the media, I guess, and in government who just want to turn academic research into some kind of instant sort of, what they want to look at the use value of it, rather than thinking about some of the longer term benefits of the kinds of research that sometimes takes, just a few years, might take decades. So it's kind of developing not just your internal community networks, but also the external ones. Another point, and I guess I think I'm just extending what my colleagues have said, is that not everyone's career takes the same path. And I think that that's really, it's important because it's, I must admit my own career has gone in all sorts of different directions, but it's not necessarily a normal academic career. And some of the leadership and governance work that I ended up doing was because I worked in a small department and I had to watch where the money was coming and going. I did say before, to watch where the money comes and goes. I could work out what was going on there, and then I think my capacity my interest in it in making sure that we had enough money to Sky. Then meant people thought, oh, well, she could do that she's good at it. And then I resisted that because it's often been quite a shameful thing to be interested in governance and leadership in higher education, which is also why you get to see a lot of women who are in, secondment roles, again, such as myself, but then also not necessarily in some of the other more senior roles. So I think that taking up opportunities is really important, and I think I've had a really interesting career, and by many sort of measures I'd probably be considered quite successful, but there are still some things about what did I really want to do, what would I have done if I hadn't kind of said yes to being chair of the department, and then associate dean for postgraduate coursework, and then pro dean, and actually took on 2 sort of terms of pro dean, and then now this role that I'm in now. So what has that meant? What has been the cost of that? But also, I should also say that there's been great opportunities too. I personally can see that there are links between that sort of pathway that I've taken and my research work. So I do research on museums as cultural institutions in the public realm, and there's quite a lot of many ways in which those institutions function in our society that require, I guess, understanding of representation and politics. These are institutions that are not just houses for material culture, but they're also represent the way they run, the way they interact nationally, internationally and locally. It's connected to systems of power as well, and often with an ideology underpinning it. And so I think I can see the connection between some of the leadership work I've done in my research, but I also think that I've not always been effective in communicating, not necessarily always the opportunity as I have now, talking to you about those links and how I make sense of it. So it's really important. I think there's one other point that I was going to make in relation to one's career and pathways, is that it's important to also be able to understand the disciplinary hierarchies that may exist in different institutions. And I think it is different in different universities. So I've worked at 4 universities, and there certainly are. You can see it's not just about individuals who have got sort of power often, but it's partly about where the research grants going, but it's also to do with the history and heritage of that institution. So again, just understand that landscape, but also try and sort of be realistic about what's possible, and thinking. I think it's not a bad idea to think about where you want to be and then how do I get there. And I do that quite regularly, but I'm not always disciplined enough on one level to then sort of follow through on it, because you're still surviving on a day-to-day basis. And I think thinking about this sort of stuff it's important to put the effort into thinking it through. And it's important to, and this will be my last point, I guess, is to network effectively, but also to understand the value of reciprocity. So, when you're kind of, if you contribute to feedback to colleagues and creating opportunities for colleagues, what goes around should come around. And choose the community network, the networks that you want to be part of based on that kind of reciprocity, because I too have been part of networks that haven't necessarily worked in my favour, even though I might have got something out of them. There's not always been that kind of reciprocity, and that's partly to do with that national kind of competitive pressure we have in higher education. But it's, I think it's just important to understand yourself as part of a network and a community in that sense. But yeah, I must say though, I feel you've all got an opportunity here to really think through where you want to go. But I know I said I was only going to say one thing, but I will say one thing. And that is, and it's also really important to learn not to be hard on yourself. And I'm saying this to myself now as I hear what I'm saying. That is that you want to make sure that, okay, things don't quite work according to plan. You make the best of it, but also sometimes it ends up being better than you imagine. But it's also to do with the opportunities that come your way as well. So on that note, I think
you can buy just the Senator wanting to donate if you have no listed.
No, that's okay. See, I don't understand the signal, so when someone says like, no, that's fine. I think that it's get to saturation point around several points very soon. So let's move on to
I just wanted to add one thing, and that is, this is of course a group of women, and you're meeting women mentors, and that's very, very important. But you shouldn't forget that men do mentor women.
Yeah, that's right.
And men do become part of networks. I mean, I'm an absolute example in the, of my entire career depended upon, one very, very sweet German professor who saved my degree and then got me a job. And
He said every time I've not thought about going for promotion or going for Laureates, it's been men that have told me.
so I think that's kind of important. And the other thing I was going to say was the other way around. So this is just a thing of my own experience. When I went to Monash University, I went as a professor into a department which had 2 god professors. They each had their own secretary, which most of the people didn't do in the 90s. They were very good, very clever, very good, very well networked, terrified about me. Never had a women professor there at all. And I spent 2 years looking after them. I mean, they were very cross, but I actually did. And actually it paid off. So it did mean, I made clear to them, I wasn't threatening them, I thought they were fabulous, I went and had lunch with them, I invited them to dinner. But when I became chair of department in a very bad time, I never spoke in a meeting without them supporting me. So I just think it's that's all I need to say. I mean, they were very nice, I mean, they paid bum, they were, but they were very nice they were men of integrity and honour. In a certain kind of way, but it worked out to be reciprocal. And it made me cross a bit. I pointed out to one of them that I had spent time looking after them, and nobody taken any notice of the fact that I was the person coming into this environment which they were at home. But in the end, I'm not sorry I did it that way, because certainly it made my own life, when I was running that department, a great deal easier, because they became the most incredible supports. So I think it's just it's a kind of question of about know your network, know who you're dealing with, and think about what the possibilities in these situations are. But sometimes you do have to do things that go a bit against the grain, because you just think, well, I never would have survived. If we were being in a situation where money was being taken away and there was a possibility of people losing their jobs, and I had to go and say that, and I had these 2 guys saying, well, in the old days this place was better, I'd have been done. But as it was, they said, yes, awful, we were all doing this together, So.